at the Tam Tams Sunday. Seems like as good a place as any to introduce the next topic of our discussion, which is Plato's Symposium. So what you have behind me is a bunch of people, despite the pandemic, despite everything, who are having something that would be totally recognizable to anybody in ancient Greece, which is a Dionysian festival where people are listening to drums and beats and dancing to rhythmic drum and beats, and they are going crazy and letting some chaos come out, which a lot of people need very much right now. What's interesting is right at the beginning, or what is supposed to be the beginning of Western civilization, for whatever that's worth, you have Plato's Symposium, which is dialogue devoted to love. And what's fascinating is that this is a dialogue which begins from the premise that in order to have a really important philosophical discussion about something like love, you need to let the Dionysian chaos out a little bit. That you've got to, and so the way they do that in ancient Greece is they would have a drinking party called a symposium, very different from symposiums as we understand them today. A symposium in ancient Greece was a party where it would be in a special room where you could make a lot of noise, say a lot of naughty things, and have no consequences for that. In the symposiarch, who was the MC for the evening, would sort of make sure, they would carefully monitor the inebriation of different people at the party and make sure that everybody stayed at this wonderful sweet spot where you didn't want people to be so drunk that they're behaving like an idiot, like Girls Gone Wild drunk, Frank the Tank in Old School drunk. You didn't want somebody to get so drunk that they just became an obnoxious idiot in some way. But you wanted people to be buzzed enough that their inhibitions would come down and they would tell you what they really thought about things, rather than saying what they, which is unfortunately what we do most of the time. If you're a properly socialized person, right, you tell people what you think they want to hear a lot of the time. You say what is politically correct. You pick up on cues, right? People that don't do this, we slap them with all sorts of labels. We say they've got Asperger's. We say they're on the spectrum. We say they're neuroatypical, right? We say they're obnoxious. We say they are, we have all sorts of nasty words to describe people who don't know how to do what most of us do effortlessly, which is to tailor our speech to our audience, right? You don't, the civilization process involves, to a large extent, you recognizing that you have to repress your desires, and you have to repress, what you want to say all the time, and you have to sort of say what's appropriate. Now, most of the time, this is a massive advantage. This is a good thing. It's nothing wrong with it. The problem is that sometimes when it comes to philosophy, which is the process of philosophy, is in some sense kind of goes against proper norms of social life and civility and civilization, which is, why perhaps people who are, as we would say, on the spectrum, people like Immanuel Kant, people like a number of the philosophers I've known in my life, maybe there's a reason why people on the spectrum are shitty at life but good at philosophy, right? Because they're able to do what in ancient Greece required a symposium. I don't know, just a thought. But anyhow, the way that they would try and get around this in ancient Greece was you would get to what we would call a safe space, right? Which is a place where you can actually speak your mind in safety without worrying that this is going to ruin your reputation or something like that. People would get liquored up enough so that their inhibitions are down, and then they would talk about stuff, right? Now, on this particular evening, this symposium at Agathon's house that is described in Plato's Symposium, this is Agathon writes tragedies. He's a young guy. He's wealthy. He's famous. He's on top of the world. He's just won the equivalent of like an Academy Award, right? And he's in a great place. So they have a big party. Everybody gets like totally wasted. Then the next day they decide, okay, they're gonna take it easy, because a bunch of them, including Aristophanes, are sort of drunk, a little hungover from the night before. Sort of like, oh man, we went pretty hard last night. Let's take it easy tonight. Not too bad. Let's just have like a smaller party, elite VIP clientele, just a few people, select guests, and we'll have a symposium. So everybody's like, all right, awesome, let's do it. It's on. Shit is on. So they all go to Agathon's house, and they're sitting around and they decide, well, what are we going to talk about? Because like I said, a symposium in ancient Greece, it's an intellectual drinking party. And they decided at the beginning what they're going to talk about. So they decide, okay, well, tonight we're going to talk about love. That's going to be our topic of conversation. So, and they come up with, a speaker's list, and all right. And this is where, and we could go into all the different speeches. They're really fascinating, all in their own way. Even the ones that suck are fascinating in the way that they suck. But the two speeches that are strongest and most memorable, and the ones that we are going to come back to again and again over the course of this semester, is the speech which I mentioned in a previous video by Aristophanes, the famous ancient Greek comedian, where he talks about how when we fall in love, what we're actually discovering is the missing half of our soul, right? And Socrates has an opposing vision of love, which is many people find it just as compelling and just as strong, but they're diametrically opposed, right? So for Socrates, when love is about loving somebody that is radically other, right? And that we tend to love, it would be reductive to say that it's opposites attract, but it's not totally far away from it. But love for Socrates involves striving. It involves a great deal of language and thought and effort. You have to try really hard to understand who that person is, right? Whereas for Aristophanes, because you're just finding the lost half of your soul, your soulmate, there's a sense in which all love, according to Aristophanes, is a kind of incest. It's incestuous, it's narcissistic, it's self-love. You're literally loving yourself. And so you hear this sometimes when people are first in love and they say like, oh, it's so amazing, we finish each other's sentences, it's like we don't even need to communicate, it's so amazing, all this stuff. right? Well, Socrates would say that's not the real thing. That's not real love, because real love involves another person that's radically other, that is not you, and that if you think that you can sort of read somebody else's mind, that is a delusion. It's not real. It'll wear off sooner or later, and then you'll realize that that's actually another person, and you can't read their mind, and you have to ask them questions and listen carefully to the responses and try and figure out, what's going on with that other person. And even then, the kind of love that Socrates describes in the Symposium, you can be with somebody for decades, and still you'll never totally know them, right? Because that person is just as complicated and just as, to some extent, unfathomable as you are, right? Just as complicated, right? So you have to work at it. It's difficult, and it's almost like, in math, what they call like an asymptotic line, where it's constantly approaching the x-axis or the y-axis without ever actually touching it, right? So love is a process of constantly striving to understand somebody, getting closer, but it's never over, right? I find that absolutely fascinating. I've, in my experience, 45 now, my experience with love and the experience of my friends and family and talking to them about it, it seems like people are about 50-50 on who's right, Socrates or Aristophanes. But all right, that's good for now. I'll talk to you later.